Well, Bill Conley has ranked every team that's played in the college football playoff, excuse me, since its inception in 2014. And he's got last year's Georgia team as the number 5 team ever to have played in the playoff. He actually has them behind this year's Georgia team. Yeah, I mean, okay, maybe. Here's what he has to say about this year's team. He says the defending national champions have played 6 teams currently that rank in the SP plus top 25. Ignore that. Don't worry about that. And have beaten them by an average score of 39-13. They've scored at least 37 points in 9 of 13 games and have allowed 14 points or fewer in 8. They battled attention span issues during underwhelming midseason wins over Kent State and Mizzou. But when they've needed to be awesome, they've been way more than that. A couple of big college football playoff wins would potentially lift them further on this list too. Excuse me. So he's got them heading into the playoff at number 4 all time. He's got these guys number 5 all time. So he's got the current team in front. He says Kirby Smart's Bulldogs were far and away the best team in college football for 3 months, combining steady, efficient offense with college football's consistently dominant defense, most consistently dominant defense in years. Only Alabama scored more than 17 points of the Dogs, who lost to the Tide in the SEC championship game. They rebounded to pin a happy ending, and with the help from a game-clinching Keely Ringo pick six, win their first national title in 41 years. You can pick up Dawgstruction below. Please order it now, y'all. I do not. It's the 13th right now. I don't want to get in a situation where I'm mailing y'all a bunch of books right on top of Christmas because I do not know if they'll get there in time. I'm not, I'm just saying, let's do this the right way. Order it today. The link is down below. I don't know if I'm a big fan of putting this year's team in front of last year's team yet. I also would add that I would have last year's team at number 3 all time. He's got Clemson's team that won in 18 at number 3. He's got LSU at the number 2 2019 LSU team. Excuse me, he's got 2019 LSU at number 2. He's got Alabama 2020 at number 1. I would reverse those two, frankly, and I would put Georgia as the 3 and Clemson as the 4. Now, I know why he's got Clemson at the 3 because they were undefeated. But that's a team that had to skate by, barely beating Texas A&M, and they needed a comeback to beat Syracuse while Trevor Lawrence was playing in that game. So I'm not. That's a no for me. Now I'm not jumping up and down as in the same thing on this front. I'm not jumping up and down about 2019 LSU being number 2, but they were better than 2020 Alabama. They just were. I mean, Georgia played both those teams. Obviously, they played one another in both seasons as well, but 2020 LSU was not even close to 2019 LSU, whereas 2019 Bama was in the same universe as 2019 LSU. I'm sorry if I'm confusing. The Alabama team of that time was in 19 was in the same universe as the 20 team. The 19 LSU team would smoke the 20 LSU team. They didn't have the same quarterback. I mean, you cannot compare. They're not close. I mean, they beat Oklahoma 63-28 in the first round, and they took Clemson and beat their skulls in. They beat them 42-25. That game was not close. Now, with that said, Alabama in 20, they beat Notre Dame 31-14. That game was not close. The Ohio State game, that was not close either. 52-24. I mean, those are the 2 best offenses we've ever seen in college football. They were exceptional. But the LSU team, they were. That's the only game that I've watched Kirby Smart's team play that I knew heading into it, they're not winning this game. Okay, and that was a pretty good Georgia team. They had one loss before that, an overtime loss to South Carolina. They could have gone into that game undefeated. They should have gone into that game undefeated, frankly. But they just couldn't score the way they needed to. LSU was picking up steam as they went on. And I don't care who they played. They scored on everybody. They could have scored 50 on Clemson, but they shut it down in the fourth quarter. But I would have Georgia. I would have these guys as number 3 in college football playoff history. But let me get back to the Georgia thing. By the way, if you're looking for Darkstruction and you're not trusting me to get it to you on time, that's not an issue. But you need to go to Red Zone. It's the only place you can get it in America besides from me. Okay, that's it. And while you're there, you can shop and get all sorts of goodies for yourself. Get ready for the Peach Bowl. Get ready for Christmas. Get ready for New Year's. All of these things. Please go visit them on Clayton downtown. They've got stuff that I can't even start to mention, but they have a ton of Nike Champion sweatshirts, shirts, whatever. They have shirts that are just Athens, you know what I mean? So go hang out, pick it up. It's great to go downtown in Athens. You can get a meal at Last Resort or The Place or Eurowrap or, or Amici or Mello, or I'm sure I'm forgetting folks. If you'd love to sponsor us, I'll just talk about you. But there's tons of places to eat downtown that are really good. Go hang out and then go to go to Red Zone first and then go eat. Put the stuff in your car. I'm a little hesitant right now, and this may be the way that we become romantic about things that we have had in the past versus what we're experiencing currently. I am hesitant saying that last year's team is not that this year's team is better than last year's team. I reserve the right to change that. You know, there's a couple of reasons why, and I will play this out, in my brain, and for y'all to see as I do it in my brain. This year's team has not lost. Um, they have not been as dominant as last year's team. It doesn't feel like. But we sort of are forgetting the Clemson game. If this Georgia team played that Clemson, they would beat them by, 18 points or something like that. Last year's team beat them by 7. This year's team would score on them. The offense of this year's team is far better than last year's offense, frankly, because they have a better quarterback for that game in particular. And a better quarterback, Stetson is better now than he was last year. Secondly, the running backs last year were better. The defense last year was better. I mean, there were some things you just kind of could not avoid seeing. However, you know, this year's team has had, I was about to say this year's team has had a more challenging row to hoe. I'm not sure that's totally true. They started the season with Clemson. This year's team started with Oregon. The South Carolina game in both cases was a blowout. This year's South Carolina team is actually not that bad. And as you progress through the season, it was probably earlier last year that it was evident. Well, maybe it wasn't. No, I'm talking about. In the first 3 weeks of the season, you could tell this team could win the national championship. The first week, you could see it. But beating Oregon and then Carolina the way they did. Last year, it took me until Vanderbilt, but that was because you had some quarterback stuff, and it was just obvious at the Vanderbilt game. These guys can win the national championship. Maybe they should win the national championship. This year, and this season's not over. It might have been the South Carolina game, but for me, it may have been Missouri this year when you could tell these guys were really good. And here's why. Because you have games like that in seasons. Last year's team, oh, they didn't have a game like, yeah, they did. I mean, they had that grind out with Clemson. Okay, Missouri ain't Clemson. Well, Clemson wasn't Clemson last year, and they're not Clemson anymore, really, generally speaking. But you get my point. They had to grind that game out and win. Um, you could also say that this year's Missouri game was a bit like last year's SEC championship game, and they had to reset themselves. Okay, and they did moving forward. Georgia didn't play unbelievable last year against Charleston Southern at the end of the year. Missouri, they didn't play great. So they sort of had to reset themselves. They reset themselves after the Mizzou game this year. And I'm trying to think, I guess the Kentucky game, are we going to say that that was not a great performance? Having been there, I think survival was step number one without frostbite. But I think that Bill Connolly does a really good job. He has all sorts of data, but he doesn't watch every snap Georgia plays like I do. And I think if you are Georgia and you win the next two games, you might not be a better team than last year's team because these are different teams. And I talked about that so much in the summer. How this is going to be a different team than last year's team. This is going to be X. This is going to be Y. And it's been different for sure. I just don't I don't we don't have apples to apples yet. I am slightly skeptical saying that this year's team should be ranked in front of last year's team. Um, and I would not put this team, I mean, I'm going to have my mind changed to have them put in front of LSU and Alabama from 19 and 20. I'm going to have my mind changed. But I'll say this. There's only been two teams in history that have gone 15 and 0, and that's it. Um, and this would be a third, and they would be better than the 18 Clemson team. I just don't see how you can say that this year's team would be better than the 19 LSU team simply because of that offense and Joe Burrow specifically. They were like watching magicians work. It was just impossible to quantify how good they were. And they went up against a really good defense in Georgia, by the way. They didn't get 40, but that showed how good that defense was. And it was good, let me tell you, in 19. But I don't know if I'm ready. These teams are close to that. You cannot say that this team is the greatest college team in college football playoff history. I don't think so. But let's just see how this progresses. Um, there's something to be said for. Let me see where he's got this. Let me see where he's got this 2022. Oops. Boy, it really gets confusing, the term 2022 for me. He's got the 2022 Ohio State team ranked as the number 23 team all time to have played in this competition, which is just a little lower than the 17 Oklahoma team. I think this Georgia team would certainly handle that Oklahoma bunch in an easier way, I have to tell you. Um, he has the 17 Georgia team as 17th all time. I do think there are some apples and oranges here, and maybe some bananas, but if I'm not mistaken, yeah, there's only two teams in college football history, and there's only two that have ever gone 15 and 0 in college football playoff. Uh, this team can do that, and it probably should. We'll see if they can.